All right, we're going to look at the American Civil War and its aftermath. So we're talking about 1850 to 1900. So people didn't expect the Civil War to be what it ended up being. They thought, okay, this is going to be quick. It's not going to take long. It's not going to be too horrific. But slowly after the war started, people were kind of like, whoa, this is a national tragedy. It's something so much bigger than we thought. They thought one single battle, but it ended up being 4 years of struggle, which was really difficult for people to kind of cope with. The war did have its positive side. Those sectional differences that were based solely on slavery were erased because it was no longer here's where slavery is allowed, here's where it's not allowed. We were all kind of put together and say, hey, it's not allowed at all. And in a way, we gained a lot of self-knowledge and strength because of that. That really, really, really high level of optimism and confidence, as in over-optimism and overconfidence, that we got from the transcendentalists is kind of going to be scaled back to a more normal and rational level. Because now we have a little bit of a firmer sense of our limitations as people. Sometimes it's good to have that slap in the face with reality. The South itself really struggled because, of course, they lost. They were devastated by the war. They had all these new federal policies, and they even had armed guards at some points kind of keeping watch. And it took them a while to get back in the game because a lot of their workers, not all, but many, left, and they didn't have anybody anymore, and so they had to kind of rethink their game plan as to how they were going to do this. But the North did well because they were already industrializing so they could make war goods, and then once the war was over, they just started making civilian goods, so they were kind of already up and running. Because of that, they prospered. They had the telephone, the transcontinental railroad, steam and steel, electricity and oil were all kind of growing in strength, and the economy was expanding, and because of that, people said, let's go to America. It looks appealing again. They're done, fighting themselves, so let's go. And because of that, the population doubled, which is huge. And the cities grew the fastest of all. Those tenements can fill so many people, and those high rises can just keep going up and up. So they grew the fastest of all. And the food production, even though we're becoming less agrarian, it did soar because of the machinery and the improved farming techniques. So that was a positive. One difference between post-war era and 1850s is that the voices of reform, if not silence, were at least less evident. Usually when you have a lot of people screaming for change on something and then something actually finally happens, you hear them calm down a little bit because they're not going to push it and say, well, great, now let's move on to... They kind of just take in the win and bide their time until it's appropriate to start yelling again. And at this point, the nation just wants to kind of focus on commerce and industry. And because of that, fortunes are being accumulated as never before. Some people are becoming extremely wealthy. But with that comes the exploitation of natural and human resources. So the 1870s in general were nicknamed the Great Barbecue, the Age of the Robber Barons, and the Gilded Age by Mark Twain. That was his phrase, the idea that people are kind of golden on the outside but then rotten at the core. And the idea that we were also just completely damaging our earth for the things we needed. That's the Great Barbecue. A lot of these issues that were arising end up being problems for the future. There is a widening gulf between the rich and the poor, and you do not want a large gulf between those two groups. It's very hard to then accommodate everyone if the needs and the ideals and values are so very different. And that's, of course, still a problem today. Also, a corrupting influence of wealth on politics. People could essentially just use their money to get what they wanted, whether it be an actual seat in politics or just a politician to do their bidding for them. Not that that has changed a ton, and that's what it means by storing up problems for the future. In the 1880s and 1890s, we saw a rise of protective associations that were designed to help debt-ridden farmers and unions of exploited industrial workers. So there were groups out there trying to help those who needed the help. But reform kind of had a new face in the age. It wasn't really about this stirring conscience and saying, like, we can't have slaves. It's immoral and it's inhumane. Now they're just kind of, let's do change because I need this politically and economically. So that high idealism, that kind of bleeding heart idea before is kind of not the same in this one anymore. The literature itself goes from romanticism to realism. So we're no longer looking at fantasy and dark passageways and creepy things and these fun tales. Now we're just talking about life as it is. So it was basically going from the human potential and aspirations to what life was actually like in America. So realism in literature is defined as faithfulness to actuality and the truthful treatment of material. That's William Dean Howells who stated that. But truth is, however, a subjective term and is determined by the writer herself. Let's remember that for one person, they may see something one way and another person sees it the exact same thing but sees it differently. Our point of view and our perspective absolutely make a difference. But that truth can of course be manipulated a bit by the writer itself. The realists have common characteristics. They are believers in democracy. And as a result, they generally describe the common, the average, and the everyday, not in a heroic sense, but as they really are. Nothing special, just people. And they center their attention on the immediate, the here and now, what's happening right now, the specific action, and the consequence that comes from it. They're interested in their effects that their work have on the audience, so they actually care about the readers and what they get from it. They want them to find this moral. They have like these little nuggets of morality in there, and they want the reader to glean those. It's important that they do that. And they do care about how the audience responds to their work. Because the central issues of life tend to be ethical, issues of human conduct, the realists focus their subject matter on ethical issues, and they attempt to present the issues accurately as they affect men and women in actual situations. So when you're reading a realist, you should say to yourself, what is the ethical issue here? What am I supposed to be taking from this? So instead of kind of going, what is the, imagery and figurative language and other things we'd looked at in the Romantics, you're just basically saying, okay, what's the point here? What am I supposed to get from this? The surface details, the common actions, and the minor catastrophes of a middle-class society constituted the chief subject matter of the movement, and for the most part, many of them avoided these situations with tragic endings or cataclysmic implications. Not always the case. We'll read a couple. But the tone is usually comical or can be comical, satiric, mocking in a way to bring about awareness of something. It's not usually grim, somber. The darker tones will come next with the naturalists. They were dark, man. But we're not going to do that now. We're just going to look at the realistic people who have an optimistic sense that feel like people can learn and become better and improve. Not overly optimistic like the transcendentalists. Then we have this little offshoot of local color and regionalistic writers. The local color writers, and those two terms are interchangeable, their career started after the war and they identified with a particular place or region. So Whitman had always said, a poet must absorb every aspect of America and express this feeling we all have as one nation. And they're like, no, I grew up in the South. I want to write about the South. I want to write about the people I know in the South, what I get from the South. A lot of factors contributed to the growth and the popularity of the movement. Civil War did emphasize those regional differences, and so people became interested in other regions they didn't live in. And during the war, we were at this point all the way out to Nevada, so we had a lot of ground to cover. And every region throughout the years had kind of developed their own things, their own speech patterns, dialects, custom, folkways, character types. It's kind of like if I said, tell me about the people of Quarryville. You might find that there's some people in Solanco or Quarryville that are very unique to that area, or maybe some things in Quarryville or Solanco that are very unique. The Solanco Fair is very unique to Solanco, and some of the things that happen during the fair, like when they put the chairs out, that's like such a Solanco thing. You can't do that in Philadelphia because we will steal your chairs. So there are things that each region and area does that kind of belongs to itself, and that's what that's talking about. So you have a couple things here. You have objective observation of social facts of a region, typical of regionalism, and that does include the dialect, customs, and character types. And you may also see sentimentality. Bret Hart grew up in mining camps, so when he writes about mining camps in California, he would talk about them in a way that was sentimental because it meant something to him. So often you see kind of this look back on things in a positive way. And that is local color and regionalism, which all falls underneath realism, which is the Civil War and its aftermath. Thanks.